Well, hello and welcome to this latest video. Today we're going to look at a very controversial subject, tyres and why they wear more on one side than the other. Tyres and tyre pressure are like oil. Everybody has an opinion and will fight to the death to defend it. So we're going to approach this from a different angle by looking at what type of riding you do, how do you ride, and in what conditions do you ride. Because all of this affect tyres and tyre wear. We'll start by looking briefly at tyres, then riding styles and other factors which may influence tyre wear. Then we'll look at why the wear is more prevalent on one side or the other in different countries. Remember, this is a layman's view of motorcycle tyres. We don't go into great detail, and a lot of the information has been simplified. As always, I'm interested in your views, so please add them below. It's always useful to have technical background, so include your setup, riding style and anything else that is pertinent to your comment. First, why listen to me discussing tyres? I've been riding for about 40 years. I've earned my living on motorcycles. I spent 2 years as a dispatch rider in London, riding in all weathers. Yes, that includes snow, rain and sometimes even sunshine, amazingly enough. In those days we had bias ply or cross ply tyres with, how can I put it politely, not very good grip. Today I normally ride every day, and I ride about 16,000 miles or about 25,000 kilometers a year in virtually all weathers. I'm an analyst by profession, which means I'm nearly as boring as an accountant. I've analysed what the tyre professionals have said and written, then, most importantly, tested their advice, suggestions and recommendations on my own bikes in real world situations. So I know what works and, more importantly, what doesn't work for me. Before we get into the detail, I need to stress that you make any changes from the manufacturer's recommended settings totally and solely at your own risk. Always ride safely and within the laws of your land. Right, that's over with. Let's get into the information. As with everything, you need a known starting point, one which you can easily return to if necessary. Let's look at the starting point first, then we'll go into your personal riding requirements and tyre wear patterns. The starting point is always the information provided by the manufacturer of the vehicle as stated in the manual. Why? Because they have spent a lot of time, effort and research into what is the best balance for the average rider. Note average rider. Also because it's an easy reference to find. It's in the manual. Most of us are average or below average riders, regardless of how we see ourselves. So why have the bike manufacturers settled on these pressures and suspension settings and other settings? As stated above, it's for balance. In association with the tyre companies, they looked at 3 main areas for the average rider, not the street Rossi, and struck a balance between all 3. These are grip, comfort and longevity. If you look on the swing arm and in the owner's handbook, you'll find the tyre pressure information. Suspension information is in the owner's handbook. For most bikes with 17-inch rims, the manufacturer's recommended cold tyre pressures are 36 psi front and 42 psi rear. Are these the best pressures for you? Maybe, maybe not. We'll look at this a little later. Cold tyre pressure is when the carcass of tyres are at the same or similar temperature as the surroundings in the shade, and the air inside the tyres is at the same or similar temperature as the air outside of the tyres. Okay, it's nearly impossible to measure the temperature inside the tyres unless you have an internal TPMS, so go by the temperature of the carcass of the tyre. As to the tyres themselves, motorcycle tyres are available for many different types of use and motorcycle, including sport touring, cruiser, scooter, on, off-road, dual sport, enduro, motocross, racing, etc, etc, etc. Today's tyres for most sports and touring motorbikes are dual compound radial tyres. There are other types of tyres, but dual compound radial tyres tend to be the most common for these types of bikes. So what is a dual compound radial tyre? A radial tyre, or more properly a radial ply tyre, is a design of tyre where the chord plies inside the tyre are arranged at 90 degrees to the direction of travel, or radially. Radial tyres were actually invented in the early 1900s, but never used as far as I know until Michelin designed and developed the first commercially available radial tyre for cars in 1946. Us motorcyclists had to wait until 1983 before Pirelli introduced the MP7 radials for the Honda VF 1000R. Note, today's tyres are usually made of synthetic rubber and polymer. Natural rubber is not used usually. So what are the benefits of radial tyres? Well, they run cooler and maintain excellent flexibility. This allows the engineers to achieve significant increases in both grip and tread life under a broader range of conditions than the older bias ply and cross ply tyres. Dual compound tyres have been available for motorcycles since about 2005, depending on the manufacturer. Dual compound means that the centre of the tyre is of a different, usually harder compound than the outside of the tyre. Dual compound tyres have been available for motorcycles since about 2005, depending on the manufacturer. Dual compound means that the centre of the tyre is of a different, usually harder compound than the outside of the tyre. This has a number of advantages. The two most important for us ordinary riders are the tyre lasts longer and there is more grip when leaned over, i.e. cornering. Now let's look at who is the average rider. The average rider is of average weight, approximately 75 kilos, 165 pounds. Remember, it's mainly just the Western world, including me, who is overweight. The average rider is of average ability. The average rider does an average amount of riding each year, 3,000 to 6,000 miles, 5,000 to 10,000 kilometers. They ride in average weather conditions, temperature, precipitation, etc. They ride on average road surfaces, sometimes very average road surfaces if you ask me. They ride a balance of twisty and straight roads. They ride a balance of city and out of town roads. They ride at average speed for the conditions. Their motorcycle is set up with those average suspension settings, those suggested by the manufacturer. The tyre pressures are usually set to the recommended pressures, so that is an average rider. If any of the above does not apply to you, you will need to make some adjustments to the manufacturer's recommended pressures and or suspension settings, either up or down. The $64,000 question is, what adjustments do I need to make? Only you can answer that, as it depends on too many factors. You will need to use trial and error to see what suits you best. Always make single, small, incremental changes and test thoroughly. For example, increase the front tyre pressure by 1 psi, then test thoroughly. Is it better or worse? Is the grip better or worse? You get the idea. To make it easy to test, use an accurate tyre pressure gauge and have an easy to use tyre pump. I use a rechargeable tyre pump which has an accurate gauge. It is easy to use and allows you to quickly and easily check and adjust the pressures in your tyres. Oh, and it will fully inflate a motorcycle tyre from completely flat 3 times on a single charge. Don't ask me how I know this. There's a link in the notes below if you're interested. Remember, making large changes and or multiple changes at the same time is always extremely bad, as you could make the vehicle very unstable or even dangerous. Also, you don't know which change had the most effect, either good or bad. Okay, let's turn our attention to the other criteria which will affect your setup. There are 3 sections to this. What type of riding do you do? Is it 2-up day trips, motorway, highway, the slab? Do you ride to meetups? Do you ride to work, commute? Do you just squid? Do you like riding the twisties, the canyon carvings, or do you just ride track days? How do you ride? Is it gentle motorway, highway, the slab cruising at 60 to 70 miles an hour under 110 kph? Or is it high-speed motorway, highway, the slab riding above 80 miles an hour, 130 kph, like you would on an autobahn in Germany? Do you ride just normal roads? Nothing aggressive? Just general daily riding? Normal commuting? Canyoning? Twisty roads? Knee down, very aggressive riding? Racing on the track? In what conditions do you ride? Do you ride in a cold climate? A temperate climate, i.e. not too hot, not too cold? Do you ride in all conditions? Rain, dry, hot, cold? Do you only ride in the dry? Do you ride in blistering hot temperatures, like in the desert, near the equator, or in arid conditions? Each of these types will usually require a different set of pressures and setup for your motorcycle. As a very general rule of thumb, note general rule of thumb, they are ordered with the higher pressures at the top and the lower pressures at the bottom, and I will put these lists in the notes below. If you're average, average weight, average ability, average type of riding, ride in all types and conditions, etc., you should be close to the manufacturer's settings. The majority of items higher increase the PSI by 1 PSI at a time, and then check thoroughly. The majority of the items lower decrease the PSI by 1 PSI at a time until you find the right settings for you. The rear will usually need less adjustment, except for very aggressive riding, than the front. Always check your pressure with cold tyres. That's exceptionally important, as tyre pressure can rise between 3 and 7 psi when the tyres are hot. Remember, the pressures will also change very slightly with the seasons and or external temperature. Where I live, we can see up to 15 degrees C, 27 degrees Fahrenheit difference between morning and afternoon temperatures. Check pressures regularly. Weekly is good. Every time you ride is better. Using the pump I mentioned before makes it very easy. Link in the description below. There are a lot of variables here, so you will need to use trial and error to find the best pressures for you. Now to the crux of the matter. Why do my tyres in the Americas, most of Europe, etc. wear more on the left, and tyres in the UK, Asia, Australia, etc. wear more on the right? If you said they drive on different sides of the road, you'd be right. But why? This is not, as urban myths have it, to do with the crown or the camber of the road. This is because usually the crown or the camber isn't pronounced enough to have any effect, or if it did, it would be very slight indeed. The real reason is to do with the corners themselves. If you drive on the right, USA, most of Europe, etc., left-hand corners are much more open. You can see further round the corner. You can position the bike differently, and you have more space to safely use more of the width of the road if necessary. So, you tend to take those corners faster. Right-hand corners are tighter, and you can't see as far round the corner, so you tend to take those corners more slowly. Conversely, in the UK, Asia, etc., they drive on the left, so the opposite is true. Right-hand corners are more open, left-hand corners are more closed. So why does taking corners faster matter? Well, the faster you go, the more heat you generate in the tyre. The faster you go, the more grip is being used, the more of the tyre you are wearing away. Combine the two, heat and grip, in a corner, and the tyre wear is greater. As the compound on the outside of the tyre is softer than the middle, it'll wear more quickly, and it'll wear more quickly on the side that you go faster on. This is also why wear is towards the outside of the tyre and not in the middle of the tyre. There are a lot of myths floating around, so always seek reputable advice about tyres and suspension. Talk to tyre technicians at the track. Get information from tyre companies' technical representatives or the tyre companies' websites. Be very wary of anything anyone suggests, including me, until you can verify the information independently one way or another. I've seen, watched and heard some very bad information and advice from so-called experts, some of it verging on criminally dangerous. Never ever go on trust alone. Remember, this is a general layman's guide. Make any changes from the manufacturer's recommended settings totally and solely at your own risk. Thank you for watching. Please leave any thoughts, comments and suggestions below. Don't forget to like and subscribe,